The thing about hunger is that it changes you. Not the ordinary kind, the sort that gnaws at your belly after missing breakfast, but the deep, ancient hunger that strips away everything human and leaves only appetite. In the winter of 1897, I learned that some hungers never die. They simply wait in the frozen places where men fear to tread, patient as the ice itself, ready to teach us what it truly means to be consumed. My name is Thomas Blackwood, and I was 23 years old when I joined the Northwest Mounted Police expedition into the territories beyond Lake Athabasca. What we found there should have stayed buried beneath the snow. What followed us back nearly destroyed us all. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So, before we continue, please make sure to leave a like and let us know where you're watching from. Thanks. The assignment came on a January morning so cold that the windows of the barracks had frosted over completely, turning them into opaque sheets of crystalline white. Inspector Morrison stood before us in the briefing room, his breath visible even indoors despite the iron stove blazing in the corner. 7 of us had been selected for what he described as a routine surveying mission into the northern reaches. Gentlemen, Morrison began, unrolling a map across the scarred wooden table. We've received reports from the Hudson's Bay Company regarding missing persons. 3 trappers, a surveyor, and a missionary have failed to return from the Clearwater River region over the past 2 months. Your task is to locate these individuals, ascertain their fate, and chart the territory for future patrols. Routine, he called it. The word felt hollow even then. I studied the map carefully. The Clearwater River wound through vast wilderness, cutting between ridges of granite and endless stands of spruce. The nearest settlement lay over 100 miles south of where we'd be searching. Indigenous peoples used those hunting grounds, but even they abandoned the area during the deepest winter months. Standing beside me was Sergeant William Fletcher, a broad-shouldered Yorkshireman with 20 years' service etched into the lines of his weathered face. His gray eyes held a perpetual squint from scanning horizons in all seasons. Fletcher commanded respect through competence rather than volume. When he spoke, men listened. Constable James Whitmore made up our medical officer, though his training consisted of little more than field surgery and basic anatomy. Thin and precise in his movements, Whitmore kept a leather journal where he documented everything he observed with neat, careful handwriting. His spectacles constantly fogged in the cold. Thomas Greaves served as our tracker and hunter. Part Cree and part Scottish, Greaves possessed an uncanny ability to read the land. He could identify individual animals by their tracks, predict weather changes from the behavior of birds, and navigate by stars even I couldn't see. He was also the quietest member of our party, speaking only when necessary. Then there were the younger recruits. Peter Ashford, barely 19, fresh from Manchester with more enthusiasm than sense. David Harrison, a Londoner who'd joined to escape debt and discovered he rather enjoyed the frontier. And Robert Quinn, an Irishman whose humor remained irrepressible even in the worst conditions. We departed 3 days later, just after dawn. 8 men, 12 sled dogs, 2 toboggans loaded with provisions, rifles, ammunition, canvas tents, wool blankets, tinned foods, flour, salt pork, tea, and 40 pounds of dried pemmican prepared by local Metis women. We expected to be gone 3 weeks, perhaps 4 if conditions deteriorated. The first week passed without incident. We followed established trap lines south from Fort McMurray, cutting northwest once we reached the frozen marshlands beyond the Athabasca. The cold was brutal but manageable. Temperatures hovered around minus 30 degrees Celsius, occasionally dropping lower during clear nights when the stars seemed close enough to touch. We developed routines quickly. Greaves and Fletcher alternated leading position, breaking trail through the deep snow. The rest of us followed in their path, conserving energy where possible. Every 2 hours we'd rest the dogs and check equipment for damage. Evenings meant setting camp, erecting tents, building fires, melting snow for water, preparing food. 2-man watches rotated through the night. During these early days, conversation flowed easily. Quinn told body stories that made even Fletcher crack a smile. Harrison shared news from the southern provinces. Ashford asked endless questions about wilderness survival. Whitmore read aloud from a collection of Robert Service poems, his voice carrying across the campfire. Greaves said little, but I noticed him watching the forest more than usual. Once during my watch, I asked him what troubled him. The animals, he said simply. There aren't any. I hadn't noticed, but he was right. We'd seen no moose, no caribou, not even rabbits. The forest felt empty in a way that had nothing to do with cold or season. Migration patterns? I suggested. Greaves shook his head slowly. Animals don't migrate away from food sources. They migrate toward them. This area should be full of game. But there's nothing, not even old tracks. Perhaps the trappers cleaned it out? 3 men couldn't clear a territory this size in 10 years, Greaves replied. No, something else is wrong. The animals know it. They've left. His words unsettled me, though I tried to dismiss them as superstition. But that night, lying in my bedroll, I listened to the absolute silence beyond our camp and felt the first whisper of unease that we found the missionaries' cabin on the 8th day. The structure sat in a small clearing beside a frozen creek, built from rough-hewn logs chinked with moss and clay. Smoke should have risen from the chimney. Dogs should have barked at our approach. Instead, we encountered only silence and a door that hung slightly ajar, swaying gently in the breeze. Fletcher raised his fist, halting our column. He turned to Greaves. What do you see? Greaves studied the cabin and surrounding area with intense concentration. Door's been forced inward. Damage to the frame suggests considerable strength. No footprints near the entrance. Last snowfall covered them. That was 2 days ago. Smoke residue on the chimney indicates no fire for at least a week, possibly longer. Could be abandoned, Harrison suggested hopefully. Could be, Fletcher agreed, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it. He gestured to Quinn and me. You two with me. The rest maintained position and watched the tree line. We approached the cabin with rifles ready, our breaths coming in controlled bursts. The door's leather hinges had torn partially free, and deep gouges marked the wood around the latch. Whatever forced entry hadn't used a tool. The marks looked like claw wounds, though larger than any bear I'd seen. Fletcher pushed the door fully open with his rifle barrel. The hinges screamed in protest, and the sound echoed unnaturally loud in the stillness. Weak sunlight illuminated the interior just enough to see. The cabin's single room had been thoroughly ransacked. A table lay overturned, its legs broken. Tin plates and cups scattered across the floor, dented and bent. A Bible lay open near the cold stove, its pages torn and scattered. The cot in the corner had been destroyed, its frame splintered into pieces. But no body, no blood, no obvious signs of violence beyond the destruction of property. Quinn knelt beside the stove and sifted through the ashes. Cold, he confirmed. Dead for days. I examined the walls more carefully and noticed scratches gouged deep into the logs. Dozens of them, some reaching nearly to the ceiling. They covered the area around the door and windows, clustered so thickly in places that entire sections of wood had been shredded away. Fletcher, I called softly. Look at this. He approached and studied the markings, running his gloved fingers along the grooves. Made from inside, he observed, someone was trying to get out, or keep something else in, Quinn added quietly. We searched for documents, supplies, anything that might indicate what happened. In a wooden chest beneath where the cot had stood, we found a journal bound in worn leather. I carried it into the light and opened to the last entry. The handwriting grew increasingly erratic across the final pages. Early entries described routine missionary work. Meetings with local hunters, translations of scripture, observations about the harsh winter. But the tone shifted dramatically in the later passages. December 3rd, heard strange sounds last night, like someone calling my name from the forest, but when I looked, nothing there. The dogs seemed agitated. They refused to venture far from the cabin. December 7th, the sounds continue every night. Sometimes it's my mother's voice. She's been dead 15 years. Sometimes it's Brother Michael from the seminary. He's in Toronto, yet I hear them clearly just beyond the tree line, calling for me to come outside. I keep the door barred. December 10th, something walked around the cabin last night. I heard its footsteps in the snow, heavy, deliberate steps that circled for hours. The dogs went mad with fear until one by one they fell silent. This morning I found them dead, throats torn out, but hardly any blood. What kills without bleeding its prey? December 12th. I haven't slept in 2 days. It stands at the window now, watching. I can't see it clearly, but I know it's there. Tall and thin, with eyes that catch the lamplight. When I close my eyes, I see those eyes behind my eyelids. I think it's waiting for me to weaken. I think it's been waiting a very long time. The final entry was barely legible, written in a shaking hand. December 14th, it knows my thoughts now. It speaks them aloud in my own voice before I can form the words. I understand what it wants. It showed me. It will never stop. Better to walk into the forest than let it take me slowly. God forgive me. The hunger never ends. The page ended there. My hands trembled slightly as I closed the journal. Fletcher had been reading over my shoulder. Madness, he said flatly. The isolation drove him mad. Men lose their minds out here when they're alone too long. Then where's the body? Quinn asked. Mad or not, a man doesn't just vanish. We had no answer for that. Outside, Greaves had circled the cabin and was examining something in the snow. We joined him and found what he'd discovered, a line of tracks leading from the cabin door into the forest. Human footprints, clearly visible despite a light dusting of recent snow heading northwest. But overlapping them, partially obscuring them, were other prints. Larger, deeper, with an elongated shape that suggested feet, but not quite human. The toes were too long, the stride too wide, and they pressed into the frozen ground with a weight that seemed impossible. What animal makes tracks like that? Ashford asked, his voice higher than usual. Greaves crouched beside one of the prints and placed his hand next to it for comparison. The track dwarfed his glove. No animal I know, he said simply. He stood and followed the tracks with his eyes. They lead the same direction as the footprints. Following them? How long ago? Fletcher demanded. A week, perhaps less. Hard to say with the snow cover. We debated our course. Harrison advocated returning to the fort immediately with our findings. Quinn argued for following the tracks. Ashford looked terrified but said nothing. Fletcher listened to all opinions before making his decision. We continue northwest as planned, he announced. This may be an isolated incident. We have 3 other missing persons to account for. However, we increase watch rotations and no one strays from camp alone for any reason. Understood. We all nodded, though I noticed the way Greaves continued staring into the forest where those impossible tracks disappeared among the trees. That night, around our campfire, the conversation died earlier than usual. Men stared into the flames or cleaned their rifles with more attention than necessary. The darkness beyond our small circle of light seemed heavier somehow, more present. During my watch shift with Whitmore, I mentioned the journal entries. Whitmore, ever the rational mind, suggested several explanations. Hallucinations from malnutrition, fever dreams from illness, paranoid delusions from prolonged isolation. The human mind is surprisingly fragile when deprived of proper stimulus, he explained. In extreme conditions, otherwise healthy individuals can experience vivid auditory and visual hallucinations. It's well documented in polar exploration accounts. And the tracks. I pressed. Whitmore hesitated. A bear, perhaps, walking on its hind legs. They do that occasionally. Or some other animal. There are species in these territories not yet fully cataloged by science. His words made sense, and I wanted to believe them. But something about the missionary's journal resonated with a primal fear I couldn't quite name. The way he described being watched. The sensation of something patient and ancient waiting just beyond perception. I said nothing more, but I spent the rest of my watch studying the shadows between the trees, searching for the gleam of eyes that might be watching Back Point 3 days later. We discovered the trapper's camp. We've been following a ridge line that provided easier travel than the valleys below. The snow lay thinner up high, and the dogs made better progress across the wind-packed surface. Greaves spotted the camp from a distance. 3 canvas tents arranged in a triangle around a central fire pit, positioned in a natural shelter formed by overlapping rock faces. As we approached, the wrongness became apparent immediately. The tent stood intact and properly secured against weather. A neat stack of firewood sat under a canvas tarp. Traps hung from a pole rack, cleaned and ready for use. Everything suggested the camp's occupants intended to return, but no one had. The snow inside the fire pit lay undisturbed, several inches deep. Frost coated the canvas. No tracks entered or left the camp except for one set leading away into the rocks above, and those same impossible prints we'd seen at the missionary's cabin. Fletcher organized a systematic search. Harrison and Quinn checked the tents while Whitmore examined the supplies. Greaves and I investigated the perimeter, looking for anything unusual. The first tent contained 2 bedrolls, personal belongings, and a small collection of books. Everything neat and orderly. The second tent held pelts. Fox, marten, wolverine, properly stretched and cured. Valuable furs representing weeks of work left behind. The third tent was different. Quinn called out when he opened the flap, his voice sharp with alarm. We converged quickly and found him standing in the entrance, face pale, staring at the interior. The tent's single occupant remained at his bedroll. At first glance, he appeared to be sleeping. At second glance, the truth became horrifyingly clear. The man lay on his back, eyes wide open, staring at nothing. His skin had taken on a waxy, blue-white color. Frost covered his beard and eyebrows. But what made Quinn step back, what made even Fletcher pause, was the expression frozen on the man's face. Pure, absolute terror. His mouth hung open in a silent scream. His hands clutched at his blankets so tightly that his fingers had frozen in that position, curled like claws. Whatever this man saw before he died had frightened him so profoundly that the fear itself seemed preserved in his features. Whitmore pushed past us and knelt beside the body, conducting his examination with clinical detachment. Frozen solid, he reported. Dead for at least a week, possibly 2. No visible wounds or injuries. No signs of violence. He paused, frowning. His heart likely stopped from extreme fear. The shock can trigger cardiac arrest in severe cases. What could frighten a man to death? Ashford whispered. No one answered. We found a journal in this tent as well, maintained in a different hand than the missionaries, but telling a similarly disturbing tale. The trapper, identified as William Crawford, had been writing daily entries about increasingly strange occurrences. January 10th. Something's been taking our catches. Found 3 traps sprung with the animals gone, but no tracks except our own. Jenkins thinks we've got a competitor poaching our lines. Morrison thinks it's wolverines. I don't know what it is, but I'm starting to feel watched. January 13th. Jenkins swears he saw someone standing at the edge of camp last night during his watch. Tall figure, he said, just beyond the firelight. Called out twice with no response. When he grabbed his rifle and went to investigate, nothing there. I believe him. Jenkins doesn't spook easily. January 16th. Morrison's gone. Left before dawn without his pack or snowshoes. Walking northwest in just his underclothes despite temperatures well below freezing. We tracked him for 3 miles, calling his name, but he never responded or looked back. Just kept walking. Eventually we lost the trail where it mixed with strange tracks. Human-sized but wrong somehow. We searched until dark but found nothing. Jenkins wants to continue looking tomorrow. I think Morrison's dead. No man survives a night like that half-dressed. January 18th. I'm alone now. Jenkins went mad yesterday. Started screaming about voices calling his children's names from the forest. Grabbed his rifle and ran into the trees before I could stop him. I heard shots, then silence. I waited for him to return, but he never did. I'm not leaving this tent. I'm not going outside. It's waiting for me out there. I can hear it moving around the camp, but I won't look. I won't open this flap. If I stay here, if I don't acknowledge it, maybe it will leave. Maybe it will. The entry ended mid-sentence, the pencil trailing off across the page. I set the journal down carefully. We need to leave. Now. Fletcher nodded slowly, his weathered face grave. Agreed, but we still need to search for the other missing persons. We're here to complete a task. With respect, Sergeant, Whitmore interjected, we found 4 deceased individuals in conditions that suggest extreme psychological distress preceding death. Whatever's happening in this region, we're neither equipped nor trained to address it. We should return with our findings and let the proper authorities decide how to proceed. Running away solves nothing, Fletcher said firmly. We have rifles, experience, and each other. We're not isolated trappers or missionaries alone in the wilderness. We maintain discipline, watch each other's backs, and finish our assignment. That's what being a mountain means. I respected Fletcher immensely, but in that moment I wondered if his courage was wisdom or stubbornness. Still, he commanded this expedition, and we would follow his orders. We buried Crawford's body as best we could given the frozen ground, marking the location for future recovery. We documented everything in our official reports, and we continued northwest, following the last known position of the surveyor who'd gone missing 3 weeks prior. But something had changed in our group's dynamics. Men glanced over their shoulders more frequently. Conversations around the campfire grew briefer and more subdued. During watch duties, I noticed my companions standing with their backs to the fire, rifles held ready, scanning the darkness with an intensity that went beyond simple alertness. We all felt it now. The sensation of being observed by something patient and predatory, something that understood how to hunt human beings in ways no ordinary animal could match. Greaves pulled me aside during a brief rest stop. The Cree have stories about this, he said quietly, ensuring no one else overheard. The Wendigo. Some white men call it the Wendigo. It's not just an animal or a spirit. It's a sickness, a hunger that grows inside people during hard winters when food runs short and desperation sets in. Sometimes a man becomes so consumed by that hunger that he crosses a line. He eats what should never be eaten, and when he does, the hunger transforms him into something that can never be satisfied. It walks on 2 legs like a man, but it's become something else, something that craves human flesh above all other food. You're talking about cannibalism, I said, keeping my voice equally low. I'm talking about what comes after cannibalism, Greaves corrected. The Wendigo isn't just a cannibal. It's what a cannibal becomes when the hunger consumes everything human and leaves only appetite. The Cree say it grows taller and thinner the more it feeds, but it's never satisfied. It can mimic voices. It knows thoughts, and it's drawn to isolated places where men are vulnerable. I wanted to dismiss this as superstition, but the evidence kept mounting. The tracks, the victims, the journals describing impossible things. If you're right, I asked carefully, how do you kill it? Greaves met my eyes directly. You don't. You avoid it, you appease it, or you burn it. Those are the only options the stories give. That's not a solution. No, he agreed. It's not. We found the surveyor's equipment 2 days later, abandoned beside a frozen waterfall. Theodore Harrington had been conducting a geographical survey under contract with the Canadian government, mapping potential routes for future railways and resource development. His instruments, theodolite, measuring chains, notebooks, lay scattered across the snow, partially buried but still recognizable. No sign of Harrington himself. The notebooks told a familiar story, routine observations gradually giving way to paranoia and fear. Harrington had been alone for 5 weeks when his entries began describing strange occurrences. Sounds in the night, footprints that appeared around his camp without explanation. The sensation of being watched constantly. His final entry, dated 4 weeks prior to our discovery, read, I understand now what hunts these lands. I've seen it, not clearly but enough. It watches from the forest edge, always at the extreme limit of visibility, never quite in focus. Why try to look directly at it? It's gone. But in peripheral vision, it's there. Tall and emaciated, moving with a horrible fluidity that suggests joints bending in wrong directions. I know what it wants. I know what it is. The indigenous people were right to fear these places. We shouldn't have come here. We disturbed something that should have remained undisturbed. I'm going to try reaching the Hudson Bay post at Lesser Slave Lake. It's 80 miles southwest, but I can't stay here. If you find this and I'm not there, then I failed. Don't look for me. Don't follow my trail. Just leave. Leave now." We found his trail easily enough, or rather, the trail that had followed his. Harrington's snowshoe prints headed southwest, desperate and hurried. Those other prints shadowed them, matching stride for stride, occasionally drawing alongside before falling back again. Playing with him, I thought, though I didn't voice this observation. The tracks led us down into a steep ravine where a frozen stream cut through granite walls. The descent required careful navigation, as ice coated the rocks, and any slip could result in injury. We secured ropes and lowered the sleds and dogs one at a time, an operation that consumed several hours. At the bottom, we discovered what remained of Theodore Harrington. The surveyor had made it perhaps 40 miles southwest before his end came. His body lay sprawled across the ice, one arm outstretched as if reaching for something, like the trapper Crawford. His face bore an expression of overwhelming terror. Unlike Crawford, Harrington showed signs of physical trauma. Deep lacerations marked his back, tearing through his coat and the flesh beneath. The wounds appeared to have been made by claws or fingers of tremendous strength, gouging down to the bone in several places. Most of the major organs were missing, removed with what Whitmore described as disturbing precision. "Not eaten here," Greaves noted, examining the scene. "Dragged this way from over there." He pointed to a trail of frozen blood leading from deeper in the ravine. The killing happened elsewhere. The body was displayed here, set out where it would be found. "What?" Quinn asked, his voice tight. "A message," Fletcher said quietly. "Or a warning." While Whitmore examined the body, I explored further into the ravine and discovered something that made my blood run cold. Carved into the ice of the frozen stream were symbols, crude but deliberate markings that formed a rough circle perhaps 20 feet in diameter. Within that circle, the ice had been smashed through to the running water beneath, then refrozen into strange shapes that almost resembled bones. "Blackwood, get back here." Fletcher's voice cracked like a whip. I turned and saw what he'd spotted, a figure standing on the ravine wall above us, silhouetted against the gray sky. Tall and impossibly thin, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. It stood absolutely still, watching us. Fletcher raised his rifle. "Identify yourself." The figure didn't respond. It simply stood there, and despite the distance, I felt the weight of its gaze upon us like a physical pressure. I said, "Identify yourself." Fletcher repeated, chambering around. The figure tilted its head at an unnatural angle, and then, with fluid, inhuman grace, it vanished backward into the forest, moving so quickly it seemed to simply cease existing in one instant and appear elsewhere in the next. "Did everyone see that?" Ashford whispered. "Please tell me everyone saw that." We'd all seen it. Fletcher lowered his rifle slowly, his jaw clenched. "We're leaving. Now, forget the rest of the survey. We pack up, we head south, and we don't stop except for essential rest." No arguments. For once, no one objected. We hauled Harrington's body out of the ravine, a brutal task that required rigging an improvised pulley system. By the time we completed the work, daylight was failing fast. We had no choice but to make camp at the ravine's edge, despite every instinct screaming at us to keep moving. Fletcher set guards in pairs, with everyone else remaining in the tents but fully dressed and armed. No fires. We couldn't risk attracting attention. We ate cold rations and drank melted snow from our canteens. The darkness seemed to descend with unusual speed, and when night fully settled, the temperature plummeted. I could hear ice cracking in the trees, a constant snapping and popping that set my nerves on edge. The dogs huddled together, whimpering softly. Harrison and I drew first watch. We positioned ourselves back to back, rifles ready, at the edge of the ravine where we could observe both the camp and the approach from below. The stars emerged, brilliant and cold, providing just enough light to see vague shapes in the darkness. For the first hour, nothing happened. Then Harrison touched my shoulder and pointed. Something moved among the trees downslope from our position, not walking, flowing, as if the darkness itself had taken physical form and was navigating the forest. It paused at intervals, and during those pauses, I caught glimpses of shape that my mind struggled to process. Too tall, too thin, proportions that violated basic anatomy. Do you see it? Harrison breathed. Yes. Should we wake Fletcher? He's not sleeping. None of them are. We watched the shape move through the forest in a wide circle around our camp, always maintaining the same distance, never approaching closer, but never withdrawing either. Circling, studying, learning. After perhaps 20 minutes, a sound reached us. A voice, clear and distinct, calling from the darkness. Thomas? Thomas Blackwood. My name, spoken in my mother's voice. My mother had died 8 years ago in London. She'd never seen these territories, never been west of Liverpool. Yet I heard her voice, identical in every particular, calling to me from the frozen forest of northern Alberta. Thomas, darling, I'm lost. Please help me. I can't find my way back. It's so cold. Harrison's hand clamped down on my arm like a vice. Don't respond, he hissed. Don't acknowledge it. Remember the journals. The voice continued, moving around the perimeter of camp. Thomas, please. I'm frightened. Why won't you help your mother? Don't you love me anymore? Every word was perfectly rendered. The slight tremor she'd had late in life. The particular way she shaped consonants with her London accent. Even the breathing pattern between phrases matched exactly. If I closed my eyes, I would have sworn my mother stood 10 paces away, lost and afraid in the dark. But I kept my eyes open, and I saw what spoke with her voice. It had moved closer, though I hadn't seen it approach. It stood just beyond the tree line, tall enough that its head and shoulders cleared the lower branches. The starlight caught its eyes, pale and reflective, like a wolf's eyes, but larger. Its body remained shrouded in shadow, but I could make out the general shape. Humanoid but distorted, stretched vertically as if something had taken a human form and pulled it upward like soft clay. Thomas Blackwood, it said again, but this time in my own voice. Hearing my own voice speak words I hadn't formed made my skin crawl. I know you see me. I know you hear me. I've been patient, but my patience has limits. The hunger never ends. You understand that now, don't you? Fletcher emerged from his tent, rifle in hand. Everyone stay in position. Do not engage. Do not respond. The voice shifted, now speaking with Fletcher's Yorkshire accent. Sergeant William Fletcher, 20 years of service, veteran of the Northwest Rebellion, mentioned in dispatches. A good soldier. Good soldiers follow orders. I'm ordering you to step outside the camp perimeter. Do it now. Fletcher's knuckles whitened on his rifle stock, but he held position. The thing in the darkness made a sound. Not quite a laugh, but something like satisfaction. Then it spoke in rapid succession, using all our voices. Quinn's Irish lilt, Greaves's careful diction, Whitmore's precise pronunciation, Ashford's youthful tenor, Harrison's Cockney undertones. It recited our names, our ranks, details it couldn't possibly know. Private fears, secret regrets, intimate memories. It knew us. Not just our voices, but our thoughts and histories. It had been listening, watching, learning everything about us since we entered its territory. When it finished this demonstration, the thing fell silent for several long moments. Then it spoke once more, using a voice it didn't recognize, rough and damaged, as if the speaker's throat had been injured. You cannot escape. You're in my domain now. This is where I wait. This is where I feed. The hunger never ends. Never. I've been here longer than your railways and your forts. I was here before your grandfathers' grandfathers walked this land. I'll be here after your civilization crumbles. The hunger never ends. Run if you want. I enjoy the chase. Then it was gone, simply gone, without sound or trace, leaving us alone in the darkness with our racing hearts and the terrible certainty that it had merely been introducing itself. We broke camp before dawn and began our retreat south. Fletcher abandoned all pretense of completing our mission. Survival had become the only objective. We moved fast, pushing the dogs hard, sacrificing caution for speed. The toboggans bounced and slid over rough terrain, occasionally dumping cargo that we didn't stop to retrieve. For the first day, we saw no signs of pursuit. Hope began to kindle that perhaps we'd imagined the worst of it. That fear and exhaustion had magnified a natural predator into something supernatural. That hope died on the second day. Greaves spotted the tracks around our previous night's camp. The thing had circled us while we slept, approaching to within 10 feet of tents. Its prints were everywhere, overlapping, creating a complex pattern that Greaves studied with increasing alarm. It was here for hours, he said, moving around us, studying the camp from every angle. It could have attacked at any time. It chose not to. Why? Ashford demanded. Why not just finish it? It's not hungry for food, Greaves replied grimly. It's hungry for something else. Fear, maybe. Terror. It wants us to know we're being hunted. It wants us to understand we can't escape. That's what feeds it now. We pressed on, but the psychological toll mounted with each passing hour. Men jumped at small sounds. Every shadow demanded investigation. Conversations ceased entirely. We communicated through gestures and brief whispers. On the third day of flight, Quinn disappeared. It happened during a brief rest stop in a small clearing. Quinn had been standing at the edge of the group, perhaps 5 paces from Harrison, adjusting his snowshoes. Harrison glanced away for a moment, just a moment, to help Ashford secure a loose strap on his pack. When he looked back, Quinn was gone. "Where's Quinn?" Harrison asked. We all turned. The space where Quinn had stood was empty. Fresh tracks led from that spot into the forest, but they weren't quite right. The stride was too long, the spacing too wide, as if someone had been dragged rather than walked. Fletcher organized an immediate search, but we found nothing. The tracks continued into deep forest and then simply stopped at the base of a massive spruce tree, with no indication of where Quinn might have gone. No blood, no signs of struggle, just those impossible tracks ending abruptly in silence. "We can't leave him," Ashford protested, his voice cracking. "He might still be alive. If we stay, we'll all die," Fletcher said bluntly. "Quinn's gone. Accept it and move on, or you'll be next." The callousness of this statement shocked us, but Fletcher's expression brooked no argument. He'd made a tactical decision to sacrifice one man to save the rest. It was the logic of triage, cold and brutal and necessary. We continued south. That night, we heard Quinn's voice calling from the forest. Not frightened or hurt, cheerful and casual, as if he'd simply wandered off and was now trying to find his way back to camp. "Fletcher? Blackwood? Where'd you lot go?" "I'm just over here. Can you send someone with a light?" I seemed to have gotten turned around. The voice was perfect. Every detail, every inflection matched Quinn exactly. If I'd been alone, I might have believed it and responded. But we learned by now. We stayed silent in our tents, rifles loaded, waiting for dawn. The voice grew frustrated. "Come on, lads. This isn't funny anymore. It's bloody freezing out here. I need help." Still we remained silent. Then the voice changed. It became angry. "I know you can hear me. I know you're in there. Fine. Stay in your tents like cowards. But you can't hide forever. The hunger never ends." Never. After that, silence returned, and we waited through the longest night of my life. By the 5th day of retreat, our group had begun to fracture. Ashford was showing signs of severe psychological strain. He'd stopped sleeping entirely, claiming that every time he closed his eyes, he saw Quinn's face staring at him from the darkness. His hands trembled constantly. He'd started conversations with people who weren't there, then realized his mistake and fallen into embarrassed silence. Harrison had developed a nervous habit of counting everything: steps, trees, supplies, muttering numbers under his breath in an endless stream. When asked why, he explained that counting kept his mind occupied, so it couldn't read his thoughts. Even Whitmore, usually the most rational among us, had begun exhibiting paranoid behaviors. He insisted on checking every shadow with his rifle, certain that the thing was hiding just out of sight, waiting to strike. Only Fletcher and Greaves seemed to maintain their composure, though I suspected they were simply better at concealing their fear. As for myself, I no longer trusted my own perceptions. I saw movement everywhere, heard whispers in every gust of wind. Sleep had become impossible. Whenever I drifted off, I'd jerk awake moments later, certain something was breathing beside my ear. We were breaking down exactly as the thing wanted. On the 6th day, We reached a region I recognized from our outbound journey, a series of low hills dotted with standing stones left by indigenous peoples centuries ago. We were perhaps 4 days from the fort now, if we could maintain our pace. But Fletcher called a halt in the shelter of these stones. We'd been moving for 18 hours straight, and both men and dogs were at the point of collapse. We needed rest, proper rest, or we'd start making fatal mistakes. We fortify this position, Fletcher announced. Those stones provide cover on 3 sides. We set up a defensive perimeter with clear lines of fire. We post triple watches, and we get some proper sleep in shifts. We're no good to anyone if we're stumbling around half dead from exhaustion. It made tactical sense, but the thought of staying in one place, allowing the thing to catch up, filled me with dread. We arranged the camp with military precision. Tents in the center, supplies stacked to create additional barriers, dogs secured where we could see them, rifles loaded and positioned at intervals. Fletcher created a watch rotation that ensured at least 3 men were awake and alert at all times. If anything approaches, anything at all, you shoot first and ask questions later, he ordered. No warnings, no hesitation. Is that clear? We all nodded. The first shift passed without incident. The second as well. During the third shift, my watch, along with Greaves and Harrison, the thing finally showed itself properly. It emerged from the forest to the north, stepping into the moonlight with deliberate slowness. This time there was no ambiguity, no fleeting glimpse. We saw it clearly. The thing stood perhaps 8 feet tall, gaunt to the point of skeletal. Its skin, if it could be called skin, was gray-white, stretched tight over bones that seemed too long and too angular. The head was elongated, with a jaw that protruded slightly, filled with teeth that caught the moonlight. Its eyes were the worst part, large and dark and filled with a terrible intelligence. But despite its monstrous appearance, something human remained. The basic structure was recognizable. This had been a person once, before hunger and madness and something unspeakable transformed it into what now stood before us. It studied our camp with those dark eyes, and then it smiled. The expression was obscene on that face, a parody of human emotion. Sergeant Fletcher, it called, using Fletcher's own voice. I'm impressed. A proper defensive position, military thinking, but you're only delaying the inevitable. You can't stay here forever. Eventually you'll have to move, and when you do, I'll be waiting. I'm very patient. The hunger has taught me patience. Fletcher emerged from his tent, rifle in hand. What are you? He demanded. The thing's smile widened. I'm hunger itself, given form and purpose. I was a man once, a long time ago. A trapper who got caught in a brutal winter with no food and no hope. I made a choice. I survived, but survival came with a price. The hunger never left. It grew. It consumed everything human and left only this. It gestured at its grotesque body. Now I exist to feed. Not on flesh alone. That's merely sustenance. I feed on fear, on despair, on the moment when hope dies in a human heart. That's what truly satisfies me. Why tell us this? Fletcher asked, his rifle trained on the creature's center mass. Because you deserve to understand. You've been entertaining. Most parties I hunt break quickly, scattered and running in different directions, easy to pick off one by one. But you've maintained discipline. You've stayed together. You've shown courage. I respect that. So I'm giving you a choice. What choice? One of you stays. One of you lets me feed properly, completely. In exchange, I let the others go. You have my word, such as it is, that I won't follow you further south. You'll reach your fort, file your reports, and live out your lives with nothing but nightmares to show for this encounter. Fletcher's jaw clenched. We're not leaving anyone behind. The creature shrugged, an unervingly human gesture from its inhuman frame. Then you'll all die, one by one, between here and your precious fort. I'll take my time. I'll make it last. And when the final one of you falls, screaming and alone in the snow, I'll feed on every last drop of fear you've accumulated. The choice is yours, Sergeant. One volunteer, or slow death for all. Go to hell, Fletcher spat. The creature laughed, a sound like ice cracking. I've been there. It's hungry too. Then it stepped backward into the shadows and vanished. We stood in stunned silence for several moments. "It's lying," Harrison finally said. "It won't let anyone go. It'll kill us all regardless." "Probably," Greaves agreed. "But it's also testing us, seeing if we'll turn on each other. That's when it will strike, when we're divided." Fletcher nodded slowly. "No one volunteers for anything. No one sacrifices themselves. We stay together, we watch each other's backs, and we make it to the fort as a unit. That's an order." But I saw the way Ashford looked at the others, and I recognized the thought forming in his exhausted mind. If someone has to die, why not someone who's barely holding together anyway? Why not me? I moved closer to him. "Don't even think it," I said quietly. "We need every man, including you." Ashford's eyes were hollow. "Do you? I'm slowing you down. I can't sleep. I can't think straight. Maybe it would be better." "No." I gripped his shoulder firmly. "That's exactly what it wants. It's been breaking you down deliberately, making you feel worthless so you'd make that choice. Don't give it the satisfaction." Ashford nodded slowly, but I wasn't certain my words had reached him. We resumed our journey at first light, moving with grim determination. The creature followed. We could sense it, sometimes see it in the distance, pacing us through the forest. It no longer bothered hiding its presence. The psychological pressure intensified. It would call out randomly, using our voices or the voices of loved ones, saying things designed to erode our solidarity. It created sounds, gunshots, screams, cries for help, that seemed to come from multiple directions at once. On the 7th day, Whitmore snapped. We'd stopped briefly to water the dogs when Whitmore suddenly raised his rifle and fired 3 shots into the forest. "I see it," he screamed. "Right there. Behind that tree. It's right there." We saw nothing. Fletcher wrestled the rifle away from him. "Whitmore, stand down." But Whitmore's eyes were wild, unfocused. "It's everywhere. Can't you see? It's in the trees, in the shadows, in the snow. We're surrounded. We're all going to die. We're all going to." Fletcher slapped him hard. The shock of it seemed to bring Whitmore back to himself. He blinked rapidly, touched his face, then looked at his hands as if surprised to find them shaking. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm sorry. I thought." "You saw nothing," Fletcher said firmly. "It's playing tricks with your mind. Remember your training. Trust your brothers. We're getting through this." But we all knew we were reaching our limits. Men could only endure so much psychological torment before something fundamental broke inside them. On the 8th day, disaster struck. We'd been navigating a narrow valley when an unseasonable thaw suddenly raised the temperature above freezing. The snow became heavy and wet, making travel treacherous. Then, with horrifying speed, the temperature plummeted again, freezing everything solid in a matter of minutes. One of the dogs, our best lead animal, stepped onto what appeared to be solid ground. The ice beneath gave way, and the animal plunged through into a hidden stream. Its harness dragged 2 other dogs down with it before we could cut the traces. 3 dogs gone. Our remaining animals were exhausted and frightened. We could no longer pull both toboggans. Fletcher made the brutal decision to abandon most of our supplies. We kept rifles, ammunition, essential food, blankets, and nothing else. Everything else, including our tents, we left behind. "We're 4 days from a fort," Fletcher said. "We can make it without tents if we push hard. We travel by day, huddle together at night, and we don't stop moving unless absolutely necessary." It was a desperate plan, but it was all we had. That night, with no shelter from the elements, we formed a tight circle and tried to share body heat. The cold was vicious, penetrating every layer of clothing. I could feel it settling into my bones, making every movement an effort. And somewhere in the darkness, the creature watched and waited. Ashford started crying quietly, not sobbing, just tears running down his frostbitten cheeks, freezing against his skin. "I'm sorry," he kept saying. "I'm so sorry." Before anyone could stop him, he stood up and walked away from our circle. "Ashford!" Fletcher shouted. "Get back here. That's an order." But Ashford kept walking, steady and purposeful, heading into the darkness. "Someone has to," he called back. It gave us a choice. I'm making it. Let me do this one thing right. Let me save the rest of you." Harrison moved to go after him, but Fletcher grabbed his arm. "Stop. He's made his choice. We can't force him back. We can't just let him die." Harrison protested. "He's already dead," Fletcher said quietly. "The moment he stepped away from this circle, he was dead. We go after him, we all die. That's the reality." We listened to Ashford's footsteps crunching through the snow, growing fainter. Then, from somewhere in the darkness, we heard the creature's voice, but this time it wasn't mimicking anyone. It spoke in its own voice, rough and ancient. "Thank you for the gift," Ashford screamed. The sound was brief and horrible, cut off suddenly. Then silence returned. We sat in that circle, 6 men now instead of 8, and no one spoke. What was there to say? We'd survived by allowing one of our own to be taken. We'd made the calculation that Fletcher claimed we wouldn't make. And the creature had taught us that we were just as capable of sacrificing each other as any of the desperate men who'd created it in the first place. The next 3 days blurred together into a nightmare of cold, exhaustion, and constant fear. We moved south mechanically, no longer talking, barely eating. The creature followed, but didn't attack. It had fed. For now, its hunger was temporarily satisfied. On the 10th day, we saw the fort's walls rising from the frozen landscape. I wanted to weep with relief, but I no longer had the energy for emotion. We simply walked toward those walls, one foot in front of the other, until we reached the gate. The sentries barely recognized us. We'd lost so much weight. Our clothes were in tatters, and our eyes held a haunted quality that spoke of things seen and experienced beyond normal human comprehension. Commander Richardson debriefed us personally. We told him everything. The missionary, the trappers, the surveyor, Quinn, Ashford. We described the creature in detail. We showed him the journals we'd recovered. Richardson listened to it all with an expression of growing concern. When we finished, he was silent for a long moment. "Gentlemen," he finally said, "I believe you experienced something traumatic. The wilderness can do strange things to men's minds. Isolation, cold, fear, these can create powerful hallucinations. I think what you encountered was likely a rogue grizzly or possibly a disturbed individual living in the bush. We'll send out a larger expedition in the spring to investigate properly." "With respect, sir," Fletcher said, his voice hollow. "It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man. It was something else." Richardson's expression hardened. "Sergeant Fletcher, we are representatives of law, order, and rational thinking in a wild land. We cannot afford to indulge in superstitious fear. You and your men have suffered a terrible ordeal. You're dismissed to rest and recover. We'll discuss this further when you're in better condition to provide objective testimony." That was the end of it, officially. Our reports were filed, marked as inconclusive, and buried in archives. The missing persons were listed as lost to wilderness conditions. No further expeditions were sent to investigate. But Richardson did issue a quiet order that no patrols were to venture into the Clearwater River region, except in full company strength and only during summer months. A broad area was marked as hazardous territory on official maps, though no specific reason was given. Fletcher retired from the service 6 months later. He'd served 20 years and earned his pension, but everyone knew he left because he couldn't forget what happened. Last I heard, he'd returned to Yorkshire and refused to discuss his time in the territories with anyone. Harrison requested a transfer to the southern provinces and spent the rest of his career in settled regions, far from wilderness. He wrote to me once, years later, saying he still counted things compulsively and probably always would. Whitmore left the force entirely and became a schoolteacher in Toronto. He published a paper on wilderness-induced psychosis that was well received in academic circles. He never mentioned our expedition specifically, but I recognized the experiences he described. Greaves continued working as a tracker and guide, but he refused assignments that took him too far north. When I asked him about it once, he said simply, "The old stories exist for a reason. I won't ignore them again." As for myself, I remained with the mounted police for another 15 years. I served with distinction, I'm told, though I never felt particularly distinguished. I was simply a man who'd learned to live with the knowledge that some hungers cannot be satisfied, some terrors cannot be explained, and some places should remain unexplored. I'm old now. My hands shake when I write, and my eyes aren't what they once were. But my memory remains sharp, perhaps too sharp. I can still see the creature standing in the moonlight, still hear Ashford's final scream, still feel the cold of those nights when we huddled together in the darkness, praying for dawn. People sometimes ask me if I believe in monsters. They expect me to laugh and say no, that monsters are just stories we tell children. They want reassurance that the world makes sense, that science and reason can explain everything. I disappoint them. I tell them that yes, monsters are real. They aren't always the creatures of folklore. Sometimes they're simply humans who've crossed lines that should never be crossed. And sometimes in the deepest wilderness, in places where civilization's light doesn't reach, those humans become something else. Something that remembers being human, but can never be human again. The hunger never ends, you see. That's what the creature told us, and it was right. Not just its hunger, ours as well. We hunger for safety, for understanding, for rational explanations. But some things resist explanation. Some things exist in the spaces between what we know and what we fear. Last week, I received a letter from the Canadian government. They're planning to extend railway lines through the Northern Territories, opening up regions that have been largely untouched since the early surveying expeditions. They asked if I would consult on the project, providing my expertise about the Clearwater River region. I wrote back and declined. I'm too old for such work, I told them. But that wasn't the real reason. The real reason is that 3 nights ago, I woke from a dream and heard my mother's voice calling my name. She's been dead 32 years, but I heard her clearly. Thomas? Thomas Blackwood? Where are you, darling? I'm lost. It's so cold. I got out of bed and went to the window. My house is in Ottawa, hundreds of miles from those northern forests. I'm surrounded by streets and buildings and electric lights. I should have been safe. But standing at the end of my street, just barely visible in the lamplight, was a tall, thin figure. It stood absolutely still, watching my house. Watching me. I blinked and it was gone. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe it was a shadow cast by the street lamp, or a trick of my failing eyes. Maybe all of this, the journals, the tracks, the creature, was exactly what Commander Richardson said. Hallucinations born from exhaustion and fear. But I don't think so. I think some hungers are patient enough to wait decades for their meals. I think some things don't forget the men who escaped them. And I think that no matter how far south we ran, no matter how many walls we built around ourselves, some part of us remained in those frozen forests, marked as prey. The hunger never ends. It's been following me for 35 years, moving slowly but inexorably south, drawn by the scent of my fear. And now, finally, it's found me. Tonight, I'll lock my doors and windows. I'll load my old service revolver, the one I've kept cleaned and oiled all these years. I'll sit in my chair by the fireplace and wait, because I know what's coming. I've always known. When you look into the abyss, they say the abyss looks back. But what they don't tell you is that sometimes the abyss follows you home. Sometimes it waits until you've let your guard down, until you've convinced yourself that you're safe. And then, when the moment is right, it comes to collect. Tomorrow morning, my housekeeper will arrive and find my chair empty. She'll search the house and find no signs of struggle, no broken locks, no evidence of intrusion. Just an open window that I'm certain I closed before bed. And in the snow outside, if it snows tonight, as I suspect it will, she might find tracks. Long, narrow tracks with deep toe marks, leading from my window into the darkness. They'll search for me, of course. They'll file reports and make official statements. They'll theorize about dementia or sleepwalking or a dozen other rational explanations. But somewhere in the back of those files, someone will notice the connection. They'll see that I was part of Fletcher's expedition in 1897. They'll read our reports, the ones marked inconclusive and buried in archives. And they'll wonder, maybe that person will be brave enough to warn others. Maybe they'll mark larger areas of wilderness as hazardous. Maybe they'll take the old stories seriously. Or maybe they'll dismiss it all as superstition and send new expeditions into the north, where the trees grow thick and the silence is absolute, and something patient waits in the spaces between shadows. The hunger never ends, and neither does the hunting. This document was found among the personal effects of Thomas Blackwood, 1874 to 1929, former sergeant in the Northwest Mounted Police, following his disappearance from his Ottawa residence on the night of March 15, 1929. Despite extensive searches, no trace of Mr. Blackwood was ever discovered. The window of his study was found open despite temperatures well below freezing, and unusual markings were noted in the frost on the windowsill, though these were not preserved or photographed. This manuscript has been sealed in the RCMP archives under classification Historical Unsolved Disappearances and is not available for public viewing. Those wishing to undertake expeditions into the regions described herein are advised to travel in groups of no fewer than 12. Maintain radio contact with established posts, and under no circumstances investigate unusual tracks, sounds, or voices encountered in isolated areas. The Northern Territories remain vast and largely unexplored, and not all dangers can be anticipated or prepared for through conventional means. The hunger never ends,